And we're live.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, May the 10th. To get started, I would ask that everyone who's able, please stand for the playing of our national anthem. Thank you. We would also like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Flyers Confederacy. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest tonight from any member?
No.
Seeing any? Would remind all members that we each have an individual responsibility under the municipal.
You've muted yourself, Mr. Mayor.
Muted.
All right, thank you. There we go. Would remind all members that we do have an individual responsibility under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act to declare any pecuniary or financial interest that we may have in connection to any matter being discussed by council and to disclose the general nature of such interest. All declarations of interest must be made before the matter is considered by council and should be made both verbally and in writing on the prescribed form to be filed by the clerk. With that, can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the April 12th and 28th council meetings? Moved by Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any discussion on those minutes, either set? No? Can I get a, okay, all in favor? It's carried. All right, public question period. Were there any questions submitted, Madam Clerk?
No, Your Worship, no questions this evening.
Okay. We have two presentations this evening. The first from the Shelburne's Farmers Market, and I think we're joined by Alexandra and Rosanna.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. Good.
I just have to slight disclosure. I have my daughter with me. I don't have childcare, so you may hear a little voice from time to time.
Understandable.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, take it away, guys.
Rosanna, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Nice to see everyone. My name's Rosanna, and I'm joined by Alexandra. So we're here to answer any questions regarding the Shelburne Farmers Market municipal grant application that was submitted. I've been a resident of Shelburne for 4 years, and this is my first year volunteering with the Farmers Market group. Alexandra is kind of leading the charge. She has previous experience managing the market. So as of right now, we're a small but mighty group of 4. We decided to try and revitalize the market after seeing a need for it through resident inquiries and vendor inquiries. So before we proceed with contacting vendors or kind of getting resident input, we were hoping that we would be able to secure some support from the town of Shelburne first.
Now, did you guys want us to go through the application? I don't know if you've had a chance to view it.
Why don't you just sort of walk us through, from a high level?
Sure. So basically, I guess the question is, why do residents need a farmer's market? So it's a safe outdoor recreational opportunity. We're hoping to increase access to local, fresh, affordable food. Running a market would make the health and wellness of residents a priority. The market's accessible and walkable to everyone. It provides opportunities for safe socialization during kind of these isolated towns. A few reasons why the town of Shelburne will benefit from a farmer's market is it's supporting local agriculture. It'll bring traffic to local downtown businesses, promote sustainability, and foster a healthy, safe community. So here's some proposed event details. We were hoping to run the market every third week, beginning hopefully June 24th. The time and location would remain the same. The location would be Trinity United Church from 3 to 7 p.m. on Thursdays. We will need to request a little more road space to ensure compliance with COVID protocols. So generally the market kind of went from Owen Sound Street to the end of the parking lot. We would need to extend that a little bit just to ensure proper spacing between booths. We've done some research on COVID safety measures following public health measures that have been established by the Ontario Farmers Market Association. So that is sort of taking up a large portion of the budget that we've set out. We would need COVID signage, screening and protocols, a hand sanitizer station, things of that nature. So all in all, we're asking for $2,000 in financial support from the town of Shelburne to cover operational expenses such as marketing, COVID and safety protocols, and other logistical expenses. We plan on approaching other local organizations for support as well, and revenue is also generated from vendor booths.
Okay.
Are there any questions for us?
All right. So in terms of the additional road space that you'll require, do you have a sense of how much more room you'll need?
I think we were thinking halfway, I guess, up First Street, just a little beyond the parking lot.
Okay. The initial rationale, I was on the farmers market board when we first moved it to that location, and the rationale at that point at least was it stopped short of Jelly Lane, so that cars could still sort of make that turn there. Mm-hmm. Jim, do you have any thoughts on that if we extend the market down past that lane access?
Through your worship, there is still access from the other side, the west side of the rear lane, off Gordon there as well. Just there might be some issue there with blocking some of the driveways off first. We just have to take a look at that and see how many people would be affected.
Okay. Okay. Is that something you could take a look at?
Sure thing, yes.
Okay.
And just to add to the location, we know there's been frequent feedback over the years of the location and suggestions of other space. And we've had recent suggestions as well too of now that the police station is no longer located at the town parking lot, that there potentially could be an opportunity to place the market there as well. Logistically, I don't know what the challenges would be from the town perspective. There are some positives with it too, because we're still keeping it within the downtown core, which is, I know, when I was on the committee 3 years ago, that was a huge objective, is trying to, utilize the market to also drive business to our downtown core. So it checks the box for that. And from a spacing perspective too, there's tons of space, right? It would really help to ensure that we are following our COVID protocols. The main reason why Rosanna and I included the current location, just because of timing perspective. We really didn't start working on this till a month ago, because we had no idea what was going on, if there was other committees that were doing it. And we thought it may be easiest to just utilize former footprints that were in place due to, we don't have a lot of time to put something in place. But we are open, especially if the extension of First Ave does not work for the current residents there. And for the town, we are open to, moving the location potentially to the town parking lot.
We did have a discussion with the Farmers Market Board last year, I think roughly this time of year. And at that point, we were obviously still in the middle of the OPP costing. And that was certainly raised as an option. And I think, it certainly wasn't discounted, but said, let's look and see what, the ultimate resolution to the police question is. And if that space becomes available, that may be a more preferred location. So I think that maybe is something we could look at. Denise?
Through the mayor, certainly we can review any alternative locations. Just to note though, with the approval of the changes to the William Street lot, there was a commitment to supporting any other parking needs for those needing to park more than 3 hours, that they could also park at the town hall lot. And that commitment we would probably need to review with the BIA as well, to make sure that displacement of those people that use that lot now on a regular basis would not be impacted. I could schedule it. I'd suggest that you proceed with the existing location at this time, and given your timeline, that certainly throughout the process we can evaluate any other alternatives that can be looked at in consultation with the BIA as well, what I would suggest.
Okay. Councillor Bonato, did I see your hand?
Yeah, a quick question. What happens if someone comes along and doesn't have a face mask? Like, do you have the ability, or do you need extra masking? Because people might be walking along the street not thinking about going to a farmer's market, suddenly seeing it, deciding they want to walk in and have a look and purchase something, and they don't have the mask.
So that's going to depend on the direction of our public health unit and what they recommend for open air, open space events. If it's a requirement, then that will be built into the budget, the COVID budget, providing the hand sanitizer, masks, and any PPE required to attend.
Yeah, I'm just thinking along the lines, like if I were walking down Owen Sound Street or coming up Main, and suddenly I saw the farmer's market, realized I didn't have my mask because I left it behind in a vehicle parked somewhere, and I wanted to go up to a vendor, I wouldn't be able to do that. That's my thought process.
Councillor Wagner?
Yes. So just to speak to Councillor Bonato's point, I think what they're meaning is with the budget, the COVID budget that they will have, they will be actually providing that. So if someone were to walk up and be like, oh, I didn't know this was going on, don't have my mask, the opportunity to supply disposable masks will be at the entrance along with signage. So, but like Rosanna said, it will depend on what the public health sort of, recommends, but that's just what I'm getting. I could be wrong, I'm sorry, but that's just what I'm getting from them, is that they would actually provide masks, disposable masks that will be there in, for that case, right? And hand sanitizer as well as signage. My question would be just enforcement wise, Are you looking to maybe have, volunteers there that will sort of stand? Because I mean, there's no gate, right? So you have to kind of watch that people could be sneaking in from anywhere, or attending from anywhere. So are you looking at providing maybe some volunteers to walk around, make sure that everyone is in compliance? Will you be seeking OPP's help with that? That kind of would be my question. By no means is it discouraging, though. I think this is great, and I would love to see the market happen back up again in Shelburne. And another quick question would be, I know you said Thursdays, but is it going to be every Thursday still, or only one Thursday a month?
So right now we're thinking every third Thursday starting on June 24th. And Farmers Market, sorry, back to the COVID protocol. So Farmers Market Ontario actually released guidelines, of course, in partnership and consulting with your own local health unit. And one of the recommendations is to have volunteers on site to maintain records of like vendors and to ensure like spacing, crowd control, capacities, and that sort of thing. So right now, the 4 volunteers that we have will be in attendance. One of us will be in attendance at every market to comply with this, but we'll also be looking for other volunteers that hopefully we can train and expand. And if there is good feedback, then we're hoping to maybe even add in a few pop-up markets if we have the capacity and the volunteer kind of strength behind us.
And just to further add to Rosanna's point, this is a big reason too why we're not proposing to do the market weekly as much as we'd love to. It was already challenging in the past running it weekly because it's always been a small group of volunteers, and adding this layer of COVID and protocols, which we want to make sure we're compliant with. It would just be too much for us to do it on a weekly basis, and having it on a 3-week basis is more realistic and manageable for our team to be able to do this correctly.
Okay. Carrie, from a funding point of view, if council approves this $2,000 request, I'm assuming we would take that from the community grant funding envelope.
Thank you, through the mayor. Yes, we had budgeted $3,400 for miscellaneous grants. And of that, we've used $500 on the Headwaters Food and Farming Alliance. So that leaves $2,900 that you have not divided up yet. So if you went with the 2,000, that would leave you $900.
Okay. All right, Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on Councillor Wagner's point, and I think this is where Councillor Bonato was ultimately going himself, which is the enforcement piece. And I don't want to flog the horse, or as Councillor Wagner said, try to discourage the event. I think we could all see the benefits of having it. I guess my concern is, I mean, I like her point about whether it's going to be volunteers or will you have members of the OPP present, especially when we're talking about enforcement. I would hate to see volunteers be put in that position where, I mean, I don't imagine rather volunteers physically removing anybody, but if you have people there that are just non-compliant, then what happens, right? And so that enforcement piece becomes really important because we see all over the country where there are people there that just refuse. So whether you provide the mask or not, there are just some people who just are not going to comply. And how does that impact the integrity of the event if you have those sorts of people? Now, we hope that doesn't happen here in Shelburne, but we have to have some idea as to what the response would be and how that would be handled if it does present itself. And so I know it may come across as, well, geez, we're just adding on additional costs. But when we're looking at what we're dealing with, it may be costs that may be necessary. So I'm just wondering, I understand the protocol of how they suggested by way of volunteers, but is that something that you may want to consider or something you are considering by enhancing the enforcement piece?
Rosanna, do you want me to answer that point, or? Yeah. Okay, I'll take a shot out of it. Yeah, very valid and fair. I have to be honest, I don't think we have thought more about that enforcement piece and, people not being compliant with it. That's something we'd like to take back. And if you want a follow-up answer to that, how it would kind of look like if we do run into those situations, we'd be more than happy to do that. My mind is kind of going to existing markets already. The Orange Farmers Market, I believe they had a winter market, and I think they're launching their summer market too. So it'd probably be a good idea for a volunteer team to reach out to the Orangeville crew and just kind of find out what their stance is and how they're handling those situations when it unfortunately may happen.
And just to your point, Alexandra, thank you for responding. Because when you're now doing your ask, that might be something that you're putting into your request to council to say, look, we're going to need a security piece that's going to cost us X dollars. And so we're looking for some assistance on that. But I'll leave that with you guys.
I think too, Deputy Mayor, you and I through the Police Services Board can maybe raise this question with the OPP to see what suggestions they may have, if any. It may simply be that that one of the officers that's on duty is a phone call away from one of the volunteers if somebody does cause an issue. The other option, I guess, would be to have paid duty officers there, which probably would be a significant expense and maybe not necessary. But why don't we get some feedback from the OPP as well on that, and then we can follow up with you guys. Councillor Buffett.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something else to that in terms of managing the event. To give you an example, on the weekend I was at the garden center, and they have a different entrance now to going in and another entrance going out to manage people, so they have the right number of people there. And I'm just wondering if any thought's been given to doing something like that as well, so that we could better manage it. So there would be somebody standing at the entrance to either hand out a mask and tell them that they have to wait a few minutes till somebody else leaves and so forth. So that might be one way of managing it, because having the table spaced is one thing, but you're going to have people just kind of wandering all over the place, and it'll be very easy to get out of control, I think.
Yeah, so that's actually part of the protocols that the Farmers Market Association of Ontario is, that having a separate entrance and exit, and everyone having to follow the arrows. And sorry, Roseanne, do you mind continuing the point?
Yeah, so Farmers Market Ontario addressed the event flow as well, and yes, there has to be like a clear defined entrance and exit, and the event has to flow in a certain way, and that's also part of the extension going up First Street to ensure that we could comply with the event flow.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Any other questions? Jim?
I just took through your worship, I just took a quick look on Google Maps here. And yeah, if you want to press further to the west, there's a substantial amount of room there that can be used before it impacts any private driveways. So it'll work.
Good news. Okay, thank you. All right, so the request is $2,000. Thoughts on that? Does anybody want to make a motion? Or Councillor Buffett, I saw your hand first. There were several that went up, but so do you want to move that we approve the requested funding of $2,000?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Bonato. So the motion will read: the council receives the presentation from the Shelburne Farmers Market representatives for information, and further that council approves the request for funding in the amount of $2,000 to be drawn from our community grant budget. Any discussion on that? All in favor? That's carried. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for taking this on. I know the community will be certainly glad to have a market back. So I wish you the best of luck and keep in touch if there's anything more you need. And like I said, the deputy mayor and I can follow up with the OPP and circle back to you guys and let you know what their response is in terms of enforcement.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much for your time.
Thank you for the support.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so the next presentation is from Land Squared. So we have Letitia who's going to give a presentation on the proposed telecommunications tower for 713 Industrial Road. We do have a planning report a little later on in the agenda, and Steve Weaver is going to speak to that. But Letitia, welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, and you?
Good, good. So why don't you walk us through your presentation, and then if there's any questions, we can ask those now. And then I would ask that you stick around until we get to the planning report in case anything else comes up that we need clarified at that point as well.
Okay, for sure. So I'll be sharing my screen for the presentation, and okay. So, okay, I'll change the style of my presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you everyone for having me. So I'll be speaking on behalf of Shared Tower for the proposed telecommunication tower at 713 Industrial Road. I'll be walking through the presentation. So Shared Tower is a Canadian telecommunication company that builds shared telecom infrastructure and work along with local national carriers to improve and enhance cellular coverage and internet connectivity. So given the significant need for wireless voice and data in the town of Shelburne, we are proposing a 50-meter lattice tripole telecommunication tower at 713 Industrial Road. So the tower would service traffic along both Highway 124 and Highway 10, better service the immediate area, the residential zones to the west and southwest of the proposed site, and also serve the proposed developments to the north east in the future. So next slide, I'll be going through the site plan. So the tower will be located on the southwest corner of the property. The tower and its equipment will be within a fence compound, which is a high chain link fence topped with barbed wires. And also the access to the tower will be from the existing entrance on the industrial road. And as I mentioned, it's a 50-meter lattice tripole. So this is just a zoom out picture of the areas showing the proposed location at the green pane. Moving forward, I'll be showing the existing telecommunication towers. So the closest to the proposed tower is a bell located approximately 1.19 kilometers to the west. You can look at the light blue pin, and another bell tower approximately 3.12 kilometers to the northwest, which is the dark blue pin, and a Rogers tower on the northwest location as well, approximately 3.06 kilometers. The next is just, we have a view map of all the locations we conduct renderings to show how the tower would look like on this location. So the view before is from the plaza at the corner of Highway 10 and Second Line. And this is the after. You can see the lattice tripole blending with the surroundings here. And this is a view before facing south from Dufferin Road 124. And you can see the after with the lattice tripod. This is the before facing from Main Street East facing northeast. And this is the after. The before from second line facing north towards the intersection of Main Street East, Dufferin Road 124 and Highway 10. And you can see further that the tower. So while going through the application with Steve Weaver, he advised us of the ambulance airpad closest to the proposed location. So we have reached out to Dufferin County Ambulance Services, and we got a confirmation from Orange that the location of the tower should not impede on the current operational ingress and egress of the helipad. And we also have submitted all the forms to NAV Canada and Transport Canada, and we are still waiting for their confirmation on any lighting and painting requirements for this tower. And also during the municipal application, as per the ISED protocol, we have conducted a public consultation that took place between April 1st, 2021 to May 3rd. A notification, a public, a formal notice have been mailed out to the properties within 3 times the height of the tower, which is 150 meters. And also a newspaper ad was published in the Shelburne Free Press. We have not received any comments from the agents, any agency or members of the public. Just to mention, 17 properties was included in this radius of 150 meters, and including ISED. Next, this is just an overview of our timeline from the day we submitted our application through today. So after our team has been exploring all the options for a new site in this area, and after a lot of work trying to find the most suitable location, we submitted this application. And in working with the township planning team, NAV Canada and Transport Canada, and also the Orange, to refine our application and location, we are finally happy to be moving forward with this proposed location, which is best for everyone. And also something I didn't mention before is that the location is outside conservation regulation limits. Thank you, and I'll be open to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions at this point? Councillor Fegan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just because I'm not familiar with telecommunications or the technology thereof, is there any health concerns that we need to be aware of with regards to these tenants' towers?
Through you, Mayor, this is a very good question. All the carriers that co-locate on the tower should abide to the Safety Code 6. So they have to comply with Safety Code 6 guidelines. But no directly, how can I say? Yeah, that no, they have to abide Safety Code 6. So no, the residents don't need to be worried about any RF shooting down. So it's, yeah, if maybe Dom Claris that is on the call can talk more about the Safety Code 6, if that's possible.
If we can get a little bit of clarification on what that is, because I have no idea what Safety Code 6 is.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Leticia. Safety Code 6 is Health Canada and ISED have developed a very stringent safety protocol for all telecommunication, internet, any kind of wireless technology or wired technology that uses radio emissions or radio frequency, such as Wi-Fi in the house, cellular devices using data or voice over data to connect to your cellular devices. They have strict mandates on what is deemed to be safe, and all carriers, internet service providers must provide letters showing the safety of their equipment on the tower prior to installation to Health Canada in order to be deemed allowed to place their equipment, and they all abide by Safety Code 6 very, very strictly. There's audits that happen continuously, and if any of the carriers are found to be not abiding by Safety Code 6 on even one tower, their license could be revoked for their entire cellular network. And same thing with the internet providers. So abiding by Safety Code 6 is something they take very seriously, and Health Canada monitors very closely in order to ensure that all the equipment on the tower is always safe to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Wagner?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So Kyle kind of covered my one question there, which was regarding the health and safety concerns of it. First, I'd like to say as well, thank you very much for the presentation. I know myself, I appreciated the before and after photos to see sort of how this would actually, like the rendering of how it would look within our town and the landscape, simply because it is, even though it's called Industrial Road, it is now, you know, more into the urban landscape of our town, as opposed to being outside of the, you know, homes and things like that, like it might have been 10 years ago. So I guess just to clarify for myself, I would assume that this is an independent telecommunications company. So what carriers do you think, you know, your tower will be able to support? And I'm assuming that, you know, when it sort of allows for these carriers, it will improve the quality of, you know, their service.
That's a great question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The tower will be built for co-location of all national carriers. So any national carrier can co-locate, such as Rogers, Bell, Telus, Freedom Mobile, as well as some wireless internet service providers for the more rural community to the east. And the tower is being built. The planning team has been working with the Rogers planning team. They'll be the first cellular customer on the tower, and it'll to follow that might be some of the other cellular tenants to follow, as well as I mentioned, the internet service providers for the wireless side of things for the rural, the more rural residents to the east of Shelburne.
Councillor Bernardo?
What I know you mentioned that you worked with our planner for locations within the town, but what locations did you look at, if any, outside of the urban boundaries of the town?
Great question. Again, through the chair or through you, Mr. Mayor, we looked further south in Shelburne, I believe, both in the urban or in the Shelburne jurisdiction, as well as further south outside of Shelburne, further east outside of Shelburne. But due to the improvement of cellular devices and the need to have connectivity and the latency speeds reduced. Latency is when you can make a call or be using your phone for data, and it connects to the nearest tower, and the latency just means that the connection won't fail, the connection won't drop, and due to the increased speeds that we continuously require, the increased capacity needs for each resident as more residents continue to use more data, these installations need to be as close to residents as possible while maintaining some of the setbacks as we would like to maintain in order to not have it within a residential community. And so we tried to explore locations to the east, outside in the more rural jurisdiction outside of Shelburne, as well as further south. And in working with the planning team, both our planning team and the Rogers planning team, we couldn't locate in any of those areas that wouldn't require another tower actually in Shelburne somewhere else to kind of match the area they're trying to cover. And so this area is finally the location that we determined would be best to cover the entirety of Shelburne in order to enhance the network as well as capacity issues in the future.
Okay. My second question, because I am a Rogers customer, so my second question, the height sort of gets me. Does it have to be that high a tower because you're accommodating more than one cellular provider as well as internet services provider? Can it not be a lower tower? Because as soon as you come into the town, that's going to be one of the focal points of people seeing it. I know where it's located. I don't have an issue with that, but just, the height is quite high and it's quite a focal point.
Mm-hmm. Through you, Mr. Mayor, or through the chair, it would need to be tall enough in order to accommodate the multiple carriers as well as the wireless internet service providers. The lower the tower, the less opportunity for co-location there is. And our approach was in working with Rogers and the other carriers and the internet service providers is to come up with a solution in working with the municipality that we're proposing to have one tower that would do the job for all the carriers in order to not have kind of another application in a year or two further south, or another application a little bit further southwest of the town, that this would help cover the need for all the carriers. And so the planning team works very hard and very diligently with all the other carriers in order to decrease the height as much as possible in order to allow it to blend in and be the least visually impactful as possible, while also allowing for the co-location of these carriers and also the wireless internet out to the rural areas.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you. I think similar to Councillor Fegan, I have no idea how these things work, so I thank you for clarifying most of it for us, and certainly for me. My question is, you talked about a number of carriers having access to this tower, and you've mentioned on numerous occasions Rogers. And so just so you can understand maybe my thought process, I'm thinking about cost and making sure that there's not one carrier monopolizing more so than the other. So what I guess I'm trying to figure out is, all the carriers have equal access to this tower. I don't want a situation where Rogers is dominating sort of the access to the tower. And so when these smaller carriers come in, they really can't offer anything that's maybe competitive to what maybe Rogers is able to offer. And it means that customers in Shelburne are stuck with one option at a cost that may not be as competitive in maybe other areas, for example. So does that come into play at all or not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great point. So I said actually a few years ago, regulated and mandated that no carrier could monopolize a tower. So each tower has to have the option for co-location of an equal option for each of the carriers. So no, in layman terms, Rogers would not be able to monopolize the tower and use it all for their benefit, leaving no room for a wireless internet service provider, whether that be a national one such as ExploreNet or a local WISP that wants to put only a few antennas on that delivers more local service to some of the rural customers. So they will all have equal access. The rates are all the same for everyone. The heights they can achieve are all the same. The width and the space on the tower surrounding the tower is all the same for all of them.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fegan.
You mentioned that all of these carriers are going to have the opportunity to use the tower at the same time. And I'm looking at the rendering right now, and I see a few antennas that are on the tower itself. But I've seen some of these in other locations as well, where they've got large dishes on them as well. Is that what this tower is, or is it just these vertical antennas that we see?
It'll be primarily those vertical antennas. There might be a little dish lower down, depending on a lot of the bigger dishes that you might be mentioning are connection sites for a lot of the national carriers. That won't be the case for this one, but there might be smaller dishes that would be used by a wireless internet service provider if they need to provide service to a specific household in the rural community. A lot of times they would use the vertical antennas, but depending on the location of someone's property, if they aren't able to properly get the service or high enough speeds from the vertical antennas, they can actually do a small dish that would be about 1 foot, sometimes half a foot in diameter, that would be used directly to service that specific customer to be able to give them higher speeds rather than 5 to 10 megabits down. It could be up to 100 with just that little microwave. So it would be something very small and used in very limited circumstances based on a certain customer's need for internet.
So realistically, we're not looking at seeing this tower completely covered in dishes as well. Just
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely not.
the rendering that you've got as is, it's okay. It's very non-obtrusive. But if this got covered in dishes, that might actually be a different concern.
Absolutely not. And that's one of the things that because of the allowance for co-location for multiple carriers, it wouldn't be a tower that would be owned by one carrier where they could load it up with whatever they wanted, however they wanted, and kind of monopolize the tower for their own use. That would not be the case for this tower.
Okay, thank you.
Very welcome.
Councilor Bernardo?
I think you just answered my question, because I was going to ask the question with the other towers we have within the town, they're owned by one carrier only. That way it means no other carrier can go on them.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they are owned by single carriers. So I believe the one in town is owned by Bell. It might be actually a co-location it is a Bell tower, and though co-location is allowed and mandated by Industry Canada, there are a lot of hoops to jump through when they're trying to co-locate on each other's towers, which make it very difficult to do. And a prime example would be even towards the northwest of Shelburne, you'll see a Rogers and Bell tower, both about 3-ish kilometers away. And they're very similar in installation, very similar in height. And they're there to do the same thing, to cover kind of the rural community and the way coming into Shelburne. And those are just examples of how, though they can co-locate on each other's towers, it's very difficult to do, I would say.
So they don't play nice with each other is what you're trying to tell me. Because in all honesty, I mean,
yes, yeah,
we've got 2 towers on the outside of town. We have a tower on the inside of town, and technically now we're going to have a 4th tower within the town itself, which is what you're putting up. And the only one that they can play nice with each other is yours, because the rest of them, they can't play nice with each other.
Yeah, they're competitors, so they tend, to not.
They don't want
as favorable.
They don't want to play in the pool together. Is what you're saying.
Not as often as Canadian consumers would like, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well answered. And any other questions before we move on? As I mentioned, we do have the planning report on this as well, so we can certainly ask additional questions as we go on. Okay, can I get a motion then simply to receive the presentation from Land Squared as presented? Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, and as I mentioned, if you guys don't mind sticking around for a few minutes until we get through the next report. Okay.
Yep, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Council inquiries. Are there any inquiries for this evening before we move into reports? Councillor Bernardo?
Just a quick inquiry for Jim. Street cleaning. I noticed that it seems to not be going on right now in my area. My guessing, is it because of weather?
What's happened?
Sorry, kind of cut out there.
Oh, my question cut out? Sorry.
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. Street cleaning. I was just wondering if it is not happening because of weather, because I noticed in my area, we're still waiting for the streets to be cleaned.
Through your worship, they have been doing the street sweeping on days that they can do it. It is a little weather dependent. If there's too much rain, there's too much water for the machine to pick up, and it kind of works against it that way. But I know when I was in town late last week, they were still at it yet. So.
Okay, we haven't lost them yet. Okay, thank you.
No, no.
Okay. Any other inquiries? No? Okay. Alrighty, then we'll jump into reports. So the first report is our planning report regarding the proposed tower at 713 Industrial Road. So Steve, there you are. Do you want
Good evening, everyone.
Offer some thoughts on your report, and then we can have some further discussion on this?
Certainly. So I think a lot of the overview and background to this was covered in the delegation, so I won't repeat all of that. Just as a bit of a planning perspective on this, it's different than your typical planning matter that you deal with through applications for official plan or zoning bylaw amendment or site plan or so forth. And the key difference here is that this communications tower is a matter of primarily federal jurisdiction. And because it's under that legislation and basically under the jurisdiction of the government of Canada, they do not have the same requirement to satisfy the town's planning documents as a normal land use would. So for that reason, the purpose of my report is not so much to evaluate the merits of the proposal against the town's planning documents. It's more so to summarize what's requested, ultimately what the rules are that apply under the Industry Canada or Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada, formerly Industry Canada rules say about this kind of thing, what the options are for council, and ultimately what the outcomes are depending on which option council selects. We have recommended an option here where we've asked that council direct staff to provide the written letter of concurrence that the applicant or the proponent has requested. However, the final approval of the tower may not be dependent on that. Basically, what would happen is if there's a letter of concurrence provided that gives Industry Canada assurances that the consultation expectations of the town have been addressed, that the town doesn't have any outstanding concerns, and then the proponent can go through the rest of the process with the federal government to have the tower constructed. There is one more requirement at the municipal level, which is just that they get a building permit from the County of Dufferin, which also requires a municipal approval from the town. However, as I say, the zoning regulations do not apply. The other potential outcome, if council were to either defer or refuse to provide a letter of concurrence, would be that if the proponent was still pursuing approvals with Industry Canada, then there could be a dispute resolution process initiated by the federal government. All of the comments and questions raised by council tonight are questions that staff asked as well through this process. Principally, my concern was, is there a justification for having a tower in the urban area, given that Shelburne's geographically a relatively small area, and as a preference, a matter of general land use principle, in my view, it's better to have these utility types of uses located where there's more space, less visibility, less buildings and structures nearby. However, in response to all of those concerns, the proponent did provide a fairly detailed justification report for why they are seeking a location within Shelburne. If council's satisfied that they've adequately justified the need for a location in Shelburne to adequately serve the residents of Shelburne with the services that will be provided from the tower, the next preference from a staff standpoint would be, okay, then that kind of structure should really be located in an industrial area and not in a residential area. So they have chosen an industrial area. The proponent has worked with us to site this in a location that will minimize impacts. There were 2 prior locations proposed, and we provided comments on those. One of those locations was a potential conflict with the future realignment of industrial road in the future. And the other was potentially a flood concern with the Conservation Authority. So this is the 3rd location proposed. It doesn't really have any big impact on the site where it would be located. I've summarized in my report that we've reviewed, does it impact parking? Does it impact landscaping? Does it impact pedestrians? It's located basically in an unused part of the site. Doesn't require the removal or changes to any of the existing parking and loading areas, and is going to be adequately enclosed and secured so that people won't have access to the base of the tower, and vehicles won't have a chance of potentially impacting the tower. So really the predominant impact of concern from my perspective is the visual impact, which council has raised. We provided those comments back to the proponent, noting specifically this is a very visible location in Shelburne at one of the highest traffic nodes. You've seen the before and after images, and that they've illustrated what it would look like generally in the after condition. The style of tower, I gather, is a function of its height. So the tripole with a lattice structure is because of how tall it has to be, because there are different styles of towers, and some may have less of a visual impact. So really what this comes down to is a balancing of meeting the cell service needs and internet service needs of the community, and those visual impacts. It was summarized, and we've received correspondence confirming that the Orange ambulance doesn't have a concern. So that concern has been addressed. And so just in closing, I've noted that while staff maintain a general concern that new towers should be directed to the rural area, except where absolutely necessary within the urban area of Shelburne, the applicant has provided supporting justification to address the concerns identified by staff through the review process. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about my report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Councillor Bernardo.
So I noted in your report that MTO permit is required and that they need to. How much discussion have they had with MTO?
I believe it was confirmed that an MTO permit is required, but beyond that, I'm not aware of any further sort of correspondence with MTO. Where that checkpoint comes into play with the town and the county is that the town and county aren't able to issue municipal approval and building permits until the MTO permit is in hand. So that's beyond today. If council supports the proposal, that would be really the next step through the permitting process, other than any other federal approvals required.
I guess my curiosity was because I said in the initial questioning that the visibility, and as you mentioned, it's quite visible. It's in a high traffic node area. Right. I'm just wondering with MTO if they had any concern about the visibility with traffic.
I haven't heard anything, but that would come out of the MTO's permit review process. So the MTO has advised to date that before they'll review it, they require a concurrence letter from the town. So this is kind of the next step that the applicant has to take in order to make that submission to the MTO. In general, MTO's concerns are about traffic operations, though. So if it's not a traffic generator, in general, we don't see a lot of concern or comment from them on structures like this.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Yeah, just very quickly, Steve, or for any of the representatives, this information may very well already be in the report but maybe just for those who are just watching that may not have had the opportunity to take a look at the report and is just hearing this for the first time, could you let us know if this does get approved, the proper permits are in place, how long would this take for it to be erected?
That's a good question. And I'm sure I chatted with the applicant at some point about that, but through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's better to have that question answered directly by the proponent.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Once we would receive concurrence, hypothetically, it would go through the final stages of the application with MTO, with Dufferin, NAV and TC. Then it would go on to ISED. And after that could take anywhere from 3, 6, up to 9 months. And depending on the timelines with COVID, everything's kind of very delayed right now. And from there, pre-construction meetings would take about 2 to 4 weeks. And the actual erection of the tower would take about 2 to 3 weeks total. So likely next fall, summer, next spring, summer would likely be a timeline, unless things get approved very rapidly at the next stages, which we haven't been seeing as of late.
Just a follow-up question. This is to Steve. Just on that point, as I'm thinking about the timeline, the benefit, how does this play in, Steve, with the provinces under, geez, what's the name that they've used for this? Geez, it escapes me. The provinces plan to get internet to rural areas. I can't remember the name of their Swift. Swift. Thank you, Swift. How does that come into play with Swift? Because my question is, if that's going to be rolled out, and the whole intention, and Mayor Mills, you'll know this, we talked about at the county level, what areas the Swift is going to be expanded into, what communities will benefit. And if I recall correctly, looking at the Swift chart with respect to the rollout, Shelburne was included in that area to ensure that residents there get the high-speed internet and businesses, et cetera. So my question is, if we're going to be getting that within a reasonable time frame, do we need this tower erected in town?
That's a really great question. And through you, Mr. Mayor, the proponent may be able to speak to that better than I can. My understanding with Swift is that it's the fiber lines and it's the wired services, whereas the tower is more focused on the wireless, although, it could also be a bit of a duplication of certain services. Cell service is not provided. My understanding anyway of Swift is that cell service isn't addressed through that, but wireless internet, one of the reasons identified for this tower would be potential additional wireless internet service. So I'm not sure if there's maybe a duplication of service efforts there. It's a good question.
So just on that point, I don't know if I think it's Dom, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I wonder, with that, since we don't know, is it best for us to get a better understanding of whether there is going to be duplicity in services before we move forward with accepting this proposal? I'm not saying that it's not a great idea. If you're right, and Swift is only dealing with fiber optics and it has nothing to do with cellular, then I can certainly see the benefit. But if there is not, and there's going to be a lot of duplicity, then I wonder, is it really worth having the tower erected? So I just wonder, is there an opportunity to get that information, to get better clarification on that point before we make a decision one way or the other on this?
If I may answer through you, Mr. Mayor. So Shared Tower actually met with Swift, and another big proponent is Eorn in Eastern Ontario, providing coverage up through Coldwater. There's quite a few towers that Shared Tower is building that will actually use funding from Swift through the carriers. The carriers would apply through the funding for the fiber to be built to the tower. And the fiber being built to the tower, they usually run some kind of split of the cost because then the carrier would use it for their cellular network. They bring fiber to the tower to avoid the use of all the dishes to deliver their cellular coverage. And while Swift would partner with a local, likely a local internet service provider along the way, that main tranche of fiber that's being brought, the dark fiber, would be able to be licensed out to, let's say, a Tech Savvy or a Vianet, to be able to provide fiber, high-speed fiber to more rural, or even ExploreNet to provide fiber to more rural residents, as well as residents of Shelburne if they don't currently have Ballard Rogers fiber currently. So we work, Shared Tower works hand in hand with SWIFT, EORN, and many of the government funded projects going on in rural Ontario, through Eastern Ontario. I know Northern and Eastern Ontario are the big pushes right now. Southwestern Ontario is already quite, not fully covered, but it's more covered than I would say north of the GTA and east of the GTA, where SWIFT and EORN are trying to do a lot of their, spending a lot of the money to do the government grants.
Okay, so just in layman's terms, what you're saying is that you're working with SWIFT. There's not going to be that duplication as Mr. Weaver was saying, in that this will be the most efficient way, working in tandem with them to get service to this area. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Steve, I mean, I'll be honest. I'm not thrilled with the visual impact of this, particularly as it's kind of on the threshold of one of the main gateways into town. Council just recently approved the construction of a new water tower on the south side of town. Is there any opportunity to use that structure which will already be existing to house so some of this other infrastructure that's needed for the wireless technology?
That was suggested, and the existing water tower was looked at as well as a possible option. And I guess it was determined that the height and specific service area weren't lining up for that, and the timing of when the tower might be built, although it sounds like the water tower and this tower now might be built around the same time. That's to the best of my knowledge, that wasn't an option for the proponent, but the proponent may be able to add more to that through additional comments.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so the height of the water tower is a big issue for not only Rogers, but any of the internet service providers for the more rural community, as well as any other future cellular provider coming on. And again, to speak of the timeline, we're hoping to have the tower built much before that. I just wanted to give very conservative timelines. Their anticipated goal to have the tower up would be projected to be this summer. They want to have it up as quickly as possible because of residents working from home, the need for high-speed internet in the areas, the need for an improved cellular connectivity for residents working from home. If you're working in your basement, working anywhere and you don't have access to a landline, it's kind of a very urgency is very it's very needed at this time. I just wanted to be very conservative with my timelines in case things take long. But ISED has been working very hard to make sure that these approvals get done as quickly as possible because they see the need, because of recent interruptions in even making 911 calls with the customer demand on certain cellular networks. And so we could see it approved as soon as this summer and ready to build in the next 2 to 3 months. I just wanted to be conservative.
Okay, just so I understand the players. So Shared Tower Inc., I'm from what I gather at least, is an independent company that sort of builds this tower and then leases space on the tower to the carriers. Is my understanding correct there?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Are there any other sort of compositions that this tower could take that would be more appealing from a visual aspect, or are we kind of stuck with the tripole lattice style structure just because of the height?
Due to the height and the kind of the soil testing in the area, that would be the height that it would need to be. We could the other options would be kind of larger at the base, larger foundation. We obviously don't want anything close to having something with wires, and so the lattice structure would enable it to be kind of slender up and down, all one width, all one kind of dimension, versus having kind of a wider, more Eiffel Tower style base. So due to the height kind of constraint, it's the least visually impactful.
Okay. I've heard of some other communities having towers that sort of incorporate like a flagpole style look. That's not an option given the height, I'm assuming.
Yeah, given the height, if it was closer to the maybe the center of Shelburne, where we could build maybe a 20-25 meter flagpole, it could be an option, definitely. But seeing as we're trying to keep it towards the outskirts as much as possible, and the height is needed, this is the style that is the least visually impactful we could procure.
Okay. And Steve, one more question for you. You'd mentioned the council essentially has three options here. Could you just review those again? I mean, the recommendation is that we provide the concurrence letter, but what are the other options that are available to us?
Well, the other two options would be just to defer if there's more information you want reviewed. For example, different styles, incorporation of a feature that the town would support, something like that. Or the third is just not taking any action or refusing the letter of concurrence. In which case there would be some follow-up, likely with the proponent and ISEC.
Okay.
To try and resolve that dispute.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of throw out where I stand and then open it up for discussion. I mean, I'm certainly not opposed to the concept of this, and I mean, obviously the benefits are there. For my part, though, I mean, this is the first time the council has had an opportunity to see what's being proposed, at least visually. I mean, I wouldn't mind spending a little bit more time just considering and maybe doing some of our own due diligence to see what other options may exist in terms of what the structure actually looks like at the end of the day. I mean, if this strictly were sort of in the south end industrial zone of town, I think I'd be less concerned. But as I mentioned at the start of my remarks, it is sort of on the threshold of one of the major entryways into town. And that's only going to become more apparent as the Fieldgate development goes in. And I'm just not sure that, if there are other options available, I'm not sure this is the one that we want being our welcome sign on the way into Shelburne. Councillor Bernardo?
I concur with you and a lot of the comments you made, and that was my concern, was the visual aspect, and I mentioned that, in my comments earlier to the proponent. I know you've looked at different parts, and the water tower doesn't fit, but I'm wondering, because the amount of land and space this tower is taking up in where the building is, have we looked at putting up the tower where the water tower is going up on that land? Would that be a possibility? And that's something I'm sort of wanting to ask. Or where our other water tower is there enough land there? Maybe Jim can answer that, and working with the proponent. I mean, looking at somewhere else, the amount of space that's taken up behind that building doesn't look that huge, and the type of tower you're putting up, and the reason you're saying is you don't want to take up a huge amount of land. So I'm just wondering if there was enough land in one of our other spaces that we own, if it was possible for it to go up in there, rather than being put up at the entrance to the town. Just, I don't like the visual aspect, and I'm just thinking as I'm driving into town, doesn't matter which direction I'm driving, whether I'm coming up south, coming down from the north, or coming out from going east from the going west from the east. Even going west, that's the first thing I'm going to see in the town. That huge tower right where our commercial is and where all our housing is.
Denise and Steve, I mean, if we did defer this and ask staff to come back with some other options to consider, how much time do you think you guys would need for that?
Well, Steve's I would say at least, the next meeting in June, first or second meeting in June, preferably the second meeting. To address Councillor Bonato's question, we can certainly provide you with the information on why the two locations of water towers would not support that structure due to the limited space that's available. But certainly, I think to your questions, we can work with the proponent to have more information to supplement the report on what the visuals look like from close proximity as well. We were shown through this presentation visuals from a distance in terms of background landscape, but certainly we can provide, I think, more details with them on the layouts and what those would look like within direct visual footprints as well as medium footprint, so that you're fully informed of those landscape impacts.
Okay. Councillor Fegan?
With that report, would there be a possibility of possible other locations to consider as well?
How difficult does that become, Steve, at this point?
So really this proposal is before you came to be after really vetting all other possibilities that staff could think of anyway. I mean, we have put that back to the proponent a few times and, can you come up with a different location? And this kept coming back to this exact area. Now this is the third location within this area, but trying to shift the discussion to a different part of town hasn't borne any fruit. I'll put it that way. It seems to be the location of focus for the customers that the proponent is trying to satisfy.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, from my part, I certainly don't want to delay the technological benefits that will be borne by a project like this. But in fairness to council, the first time we saw this, at least in terms of a visual rendering, was last Thursday. And because it is going to be in such a prominent area of town, I don't think that a few more weeks is going to really be unreasonable in terms of us asking some additional questions and just looking at our options. Dom?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I could also go back to the proponents as well as the planning team with Rogers. And in order to keep things moving as quickly as possible, try to have some kind of determination if we can change the style or the height in any way. I'll let them know that it was council's request and strong suggestion that the height and the style be something that's even less visually impactful. And I will come back to the planning team as well as council in the next meeting, or the planning team first, sorry, with some alternatives in order to be able to, one, keep the application moving as quickly as possible to provide the technological benefits, but also to meet the comments and from council today. So I will get some kind of alternatives figured out in the next couple weeks, so that in the next meeting we'll have something to propose to council through the planning team that would be more suitable for council.
With that, then I'll make a motion that council receives report P 2021-13 for information, and that the matter be deferred to just looking ahead, the second meeting in June is the June 28th meeting of council, and the council directs staff to work with the proponent and to provide a report at that meeting outlining additional options for council to consider. Is that direct enough, Denise and Steve, for you guys? Okay. Can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Bonato. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? That's carried. Okay, well, thank you, and look forward to continuing to work with you, and hopefully we can arrive at something that keeps everybody happy.
Yeah, then thank you so much, council, planning team, and mayor, for taking the time tonight.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, so the next item is a matter that was deferred from one of our April meetings regarding the proposed amendment to the zoning bylaw for 105 Mill Street. Steve, do you want to provide any comments on this at all? Or, I mean, nothing's, I guess, changed from your perspective. The rationale, I think, from council's perspective when we deferred it was to get through the special meeting on allocation to get a sense of where things were at in terms of our bigger picture allocation capacities, and then view this through that lens.
Correct. And we put this back on the agenda because there was, as part of that resolution previously, specifically a mention of tonight's meeting of bringing it back. Now, appreciate that council hasn't seen a report yet on the servicing reserves. So yeah, that will be at the next meeting. The applicant is requesting a decision sooner than later, if possible. If I can indulge council, I have been discussing some of the concerns that were raised at the meeting with the applicant, and the applicant, Ms. Jennifer Smith, who's with us in the meeting tonight, has provided me with some additional comments and information, and not to read all that out to you, but maybe I'll just summarize that briefly, if that's okay. Sure. Okay, so there were a few things that we discussed. So the first was, which I think was the predominant concern, was regarding the water and wastewater infrastructure for supporting the two additional units proposed. So one thing that was pointed out by the applicant regarding that is that they don't anticipate any significant impact to the water and wastewater services because if it's not permitted to be demised into 3 units, there are as of right zoning permissions to demise it into 2 units. And those 2 units would be larger and in likelihood would have more bedrooms, and the total number of people in the building is not likely to change significantly, whether it's single, detached, 2 units or 3. I think there is some validity to that argument. Certainly a conversion of an existing house doesn't have the same impact as building a brand new home elsewhere in town. So I would expect that the allocation impact of this type of thing will have less of an impact on the flows at the plant than say new homes being built in a new subdivision. However, we do have to anticipate it will have some impact. Otherwise, if we don't count it at all, we could run into some trouble about how much capacity is remaining. The second comment was just about general comparison of this with the larger developments which are allocated. So the reason that there's not very much capacity remaining is that most of it is allocated to large developments that are on the cusp of being built. So the applicant just noted that the vacancy rate, from her understanding, is less than 1% for rental units, that they've received several calls from people that have heard these units may be available and that they even wanted to provide a deposit, just as an example, to demonstrate how significant the housing situation is from a rental demand standpoint, and that these units would specifically help to fill that gap. In a relatively simple way, I think it's been identified by applicants for this kind of thing in the past that it's a relatively inexpensive way and efficient way to provide additional rental housing, albeit a specific type, within existing housing stock, as opposed to building brand new dwellings on land that still needs to be serviced. So that's just the comparison there with the other development that has some servicing allocation. And then the next point was just about coinciding with the town policies and objectives, as well as those of the county and the province for providing rental and affordable housing. So the applicant's just pointing out that's what they are aiming to do here, not changing the exterior look at all of the house or the exterior size and footprint of the house, a bit of widening of the driveway for additional parking, but nothing out of character from within the neighborhood. There are some additional responses to comments that were made about concerns with respect to maintenance and potential issues with parking, that the owners are providing the parking that's required, 1 space per unit. Also that those types of issues with respect to maintenance and that kind of thing are not necessarily an ownership versus rental matter, that those can be issues no matter what the form of occupancy and ownership is. The applicant just also noted that if there are too many roadblocks for this kind of thing, the issue can become for municipalities that it's done illegally. I generally agree with that comment. It's not something we promote, that people do it without getting permission from the town, but if it's shut down altogether, i.e. nobody can do it for a period of time because of a concern, or if the process is too cumbersome, then that does present potentially a greater risk of people doing it without permission. And then finally, just as a bit of background on her own situation, Ms. Smith has just outlined that during the pandemic, they've been unable to run their hearing and vision screening program in schools. So they've tried to be creative and chose this, as a new venture with providing some rental units in town. And to try and have a positive impact on their community. So it's really their hope that this would become a welcome partnership with the town. They also noted that their daughter lives, or Ms. Smith's daughter lives in town, and that converting single family homes into a few affordable housing units satisfies some of the needs of the community. So that's really basically a bit of an overview of the comments that were provided by Ms. Smith. And, there are some options again for council. One would be the bylaw is there and it's recommended or it's ready for consideration of approval. If council is satisfied with it. Another option would be, to have that servicing full picture on the servicing situation, which will be at the next meeting on May 31st, and then have this bylaw come back following further deliberation on servicing related considerations.
Okay. Councillor Buffett.
Yeah, just in discussions with that, I guess my concern is because council is going to be dealing with sewage allocation for everybody right now because of the position that we're in, I think it would be sending the wrong message if we just said, yeah, we'll go ahead and approve this because it's just a small application. I would prefer to have it delayed until we decide exactly, because we don't know right now what the report's going to say in terms of what Steve writes as to how we handle allocation and whether it's small or large developments in general. So I just think it would be helpful to have another deferral for another 2 weeks, and I'd be happy to make a motion to that effect.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Sorry, is there a way I can just?
Yeah, in a second. Sorry. Yeah. So Councillor Bernardo, are you seconding that motion then?
Yes,
okay.
I am. If
okay. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I concur with Councillor Buffett. It was going to be one of my comments that while I know it's only going to be 2 additional units taken up in our sewage treatment plant by having those apartments in there. Right now, we are having a wet spring and a wet season. We don't know how much reserve we have in the way of, in case of, like we've been told up to now, we have 79 units left, 2 more gone, 77 units would be left. But we don't know how much reserve we have in total in that in case we have a couple of wet summers and wet springs that could put us in the wrong. So I just want a little bit more better information from our engineer before I jump in and say, yeah, great, let's approve this, for additional rental units. And a couple of weeks more wait isn't going to stop anybody from renting those units. And I would be a lot more comfortable in saying, yeah, go ahead and rezone it. So that's my reason for seconding it.
Okay, thank you. Steve, the report that's coming back to council on the 31st rather, I think will include some discussion on some of these smaller impact intensification style applications, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Are there any other comments from council? And once council's had an opportunity, I will allow Ms. Smith an opportunity to speak as well. No, okay. All right, Ms. Smith.
So I thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to clarify, because it is already zoned, we can, it's my understanding that we can put a basement apartment in one already. Am I correct in that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there is a requirement in the zoning bylaw that to have a unit below grade, it has to be a minimum of 50, the floor to ceiling distance in that lowest level has to be 50% above the surrounding grade. And I think that is one requirement that is being addressed through the bylaw. The bylaw that's requested.
Okay.
So you do have a zoning permission in the R2 zone to have 2 units in the dwelling. However, to put one in the lower level, you do have to get the rezoning approved to permit something that's more below grade than the bylaw contemplates.
Okay. So I guess my point, was going to be that if we can put 2 units in already, that would house 2 families, and our plan for the basement are 2 bachelor apartments, right? Because they're small, that's what we anticipate. So my feeling is that we're actually probably have less impact on the sewage treatment than we would if we did it the way the town already sees it. And I appreciate that it's sort of outside the box thinking, because these kinds of units are not generally, people don't think about making the 2 or smaller units, but that was what we understand the need in the community is not everybody can afford large mortgages and expensive rent. And there's clearly a need in the community for these apartments. We haven't even advertised for it and people are asking us for them. So I know it's outside the norm, but it's not going to impact the sewer any more than it would be if we were doing it the traditional way. So I think firstly, that's my point. And secondly, I understand that it doesn't seem like it might not have a big impact to wait another 3 weeks, but you can appreciate we're not a big corporation. We're paying a mortgage every month and not having to be able to move forward with those plans, because now we still have to submit and have those plans approved. And this is a partnership that we would like, if we can make this work, we'd like to do it again. And we know that there's a huge need for affordable housing in the community. And so do you see my point? It's making it very tough for us to do this, because it's not just as soon as we get approval that we can just go. Now we then have to submit the drawings, and we don't want to pay for drawings for something that we don't know is going to happen. So it's all pushing it back. So it may only be 2-3 weeks to some folks here, but to us, it's a long time, right? And it's not going to impact the sewer or the water in any way at all. That wouldn't already happen if we rented to 2 families. So anyways, that's my point.
Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
So there is a bit of a timeline for further approvals beyond the decision on the bylaw. So, if the bylaw were approved, there's a notice that has to go out within 15 days, and there's an appeal period, which is 20 days. Municipal approval for the building permit for the renovations can't be issued until that appeal period's over and that there's been no appeals. So it's another, likely a month for a permit. So I think that's the impact that Ms. Smith is referring to, is just that if there's a 3-week delay or a further 3 weeks from now till when a decision can be rendered, it's on top of that 30 days or so. On the other point, I do think that's you're probably about the same ballpark number of people, whether it's 2 units or 3 units, because the units, the 2 below grade units, are going to be half the size of what 1 unit would be. There's no way to know that for sure, though. Like we can't regulate the number of people who live in a dwelling other than from a health standard standpoint if it got a little bit out of control. So there really is no way to guarantee that, 3 units will have the same or less than 2 units. But by averages, I would say in the norm, if they're smaller apartments, you're probably going to be about this, a similar number.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the concern. I mean, in ordinary times, if it weren't for the severe shortage in capacity that we have, we'd probably be more comfortable in playing those odds. And Ms. Smith, I mean, I for one, and I think probably speak on behalf of the rest of council, certainly understand what you're saying and do appreciate the fact that you're, coming at this through legal channels. Please don't for a second lose sight of that. But, it's an extraordinarily strange time for us in the sense that we have very, very limited capacity. And as I say, in different times where that wasn't a concern, I don't think you'd see any issues here, but we have to make sure that every single unit of capacity is respected and looked at, very closely right now over the next couple of years until the plant expansion is done. So I mean, in the spirit of partnership, I would ask that you work with us, understanding that a couple of weeks to you is a bigger deal than it may be to us sitting here, but I'm asking you to understand from our perspective too, how careful we have to be with the remaining limited capacity that we have. So in that spirit of cooperation, I'm hoping that we can move ahead, but do so responsibly and make a decision on the 31st. I'm going to support the motion only because I would like to have that clear picture in the form of the staff report, but before I make a decision on a one-off basis here. Any other comments, Councillor Bernardo?
I agree with you, Your Worship. I would fully support this outside of the current time frame we're in right now with this sewage situation we have. And in your initial report, Steve, you said way back when we started this out that it was going to be, even though they are 2 bachelors, and that was going to be 2 units in total taken out of the sewage capacity. So that's where I'm coming from, the fact that that's 2 more units. We only had 79 to begin with. 2 more units going out there, we're left with 77 units. I mean, I'm trying to get back to the point. In the house where I live, okay, 2 people. Average is what, 2.5, 3 per a normal house? And then when you look at apartments, I don't think the average is exactly the same as per a normal house. And I do understand Ms. Smith can do 2 apartments with probably, I'm not sure on the upper level or not. But what I'm trying to get at is the amount of people in apartments does not equal the amount of people in a normal residential house. It's different for apartments. There's more people usually in an apartment because, a family is usually 2.5 to 3 people at the max, with kids and whatnot. So that's where our concern is. Yes, it does impact the sewage treatment plant. Now, I'm not so much worried about the water right now, but I am worried about the sewage treatment plant. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, with a wet year, and it's happened before. I've been on council for quite a number of years, and it's happened to us, and before we got so darn tight that we almost went to our limit on the license on the sewage treatment plant because we didn't have the capacity we were supposed to have. In fact, we were in trouble. We went over our capacity without realizing it. And I don't want to be in that position on council again. I don't want us to be over capacity and having the ministry looking over my shoulders and being ready to be in trouble with the ministry. So that's why I'm being so careful.
Any other comments on the motion? Madam Clerk, just to be clear, then the motion essentially would be to refer this matter until the May 31st meeting, until council has had an opportunity to receive the staff report regarding allocation.
Yes, sir.
So if there's no other comments, I'll call the question then. All in favor, the motion on the floor? Okay, any opposed? All right, that motion's carried. Okay. So I guess we'll see you back on May 31st then.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. With council's indulgence, I know our fire chief is waiting in the wings. Is everybody okay if I move item number 5 up a couple of places on the agenda, just so that Chief Snyder can answer any questions we may have and then carry on with his evening? As interesting as this is, I'm sure you may have other things you might want to do tonight, Ralph.
I'm still awake.
Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, so we'll move to number 5, which is a report from the clerk regarding a draft fireworks bylaw. So Jennifer, if you want to give a brief overview of the report, and then Chief Snyder is here to answer any questions with respect to the draft bylaw.
Yes, and through your worship, I'll just give a very high-level overview. So staff in consultation with Fire Chief Snyder have determined that it's necessary for the health and safety of Shelburne residents to introduce a fireworks bylaw. Previously, fireworks in the town of Shelburne were only regulated with limited provisions through the town's noise bylaw. The fireworks bylaw will set out the provisions for selling fireworks, clarify the dates and times when fireworks can be used, establish classes of fireworks, clarify the types of fireworks that may be sold, used, and stored by residents and business owners. The regulations included in the bylaw are in keeping with federal and provincial acts and regulations and are within the jurisdiction of municipal governments. So noted in the report, for information purposes, our summary of the applicable laws. They have been provided to you. Currently, there are no financial impacts, and the fire chief and bylaw enforcement officer have consulted with each other to bring forward the report in front of you tonight, as well as the bylaw attached to the report. And the recommendation is to approve the fireworks bylaw. And with that, that's your very quick high-level overview. If you have any questions, Fire Chief Snyder is here to answer them for you.
Okay. And Chief Snyder, I guess, but before you begin, this is actually your first appearance before council. So I'm not sure, some members of council may not have had a chance to meet you yet, which is probably well past due. But anyways, here you are. So whatever you want to make in terms of introductory remarks before you get into the report, feel free.
Okay, hello everyone. I have met about half of the staff here through various meetings, council members as well. It's nice to meet the rest of you. I've heard of most of you. I try to follow all the council meetings for the 5 municipalities that I work with, and I'm involved in, well, quite a few emergency management meetings with staff during this, since I came in the middle of a pandemic. Is the reason I haven't been here at council before. Anyways, great to meet you all. I got to give credit to Tammy, your bylaws officer. She actually wrote this bylaw. And then I reviewed the draft and made some very, very minor changes. She did a great job right off the bat. And I like the way it's worded. It's very similar to other ones I've seen.
Okay, has everybody had a chance to review the draft? Any questions? Councilor Bernardo, you're mulling. I can see the wheels turning there.
No, I don't actually have a question. Just a quick comment. I've been pushing for this bylaw, as the mayor knows, for a long, long time. It's been of a concern to me from way back many years when living in town. I once had a fireworks land on top of a propane tank that was beside my house, which did not really make me happy, thinking that I could have blown up and lost house, wife, and children. So I've been pushing for this bylaw for quite a long time to be regulated. And I know that our former fire chief did bring it to council at one point, but there was some questions regarding timing and some other issues. And he said he was going to work on it, and unfortunately it never came back. So I had a I had a good look at this bylaw, and I went through it, and I agree with the chief. It's a very good bylaw. It regulates not only the times, it regulates the storage, which is a concern to me within the town, because I've seen some of the way some of the fireworks have been stored within town, and wasn't totally happy with it. And also knowing that in some cases, the fire chief didn't even know that those stores, I'm not saying the current fire chief, but some of the fire chiefs that we had in the past had no idea what stores were selling what fireworks. So I'm quite willing to move this bylaw forward, and when the time comes, and quite happy with it.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? No? Okay. So moved by Councillor Bernardo. Be it resolved, the council receives report LS 2021-08 from the clerk as presented and circulated, and that leave be given for the reading and enacting of bylaw number 23-2021, being a bylaw to regulate the sale, use, and storage of fireworks within the town of Shelburne. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Fegan. Okay. All in favor? That's carried. Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Your worship, thank you very much. I am going to leave the meeting now and carry on with my evening at home. Thank you.
Enjoy your evening, and I'll see you tomorrow at 11:30.
Yes, we will.
All right, take care. All right, so back to report number 3, which is a report from our CAO regarding the Jack Downing Park project costs.
Thank you, Mayor Mills. As you had asked at the last meeting, this is an update on the project in celebration of the 20th year anniversary of Jack Downing Park. It also addresses a previous motion of council regarding installing letters similar to those that are in the city of Toronto at Nathan Skillip Squares in this park, and provides a suggested recommendation regarding that element of the project. So overall, the project was originally approved in the budget of 2020. It was deferred to 2021 due to COVID becoming something we were all dealing with as communities across the world. Just a little bit of history on the park was included in the report as background for everyone, mostly the public. In terms of the history, as I noted, the park is celebrating or would be recognizing its 20th year anniversary in 2020. It was named after a very well-known member of the community. Jack Downing Park is named after John Robert Jack Downing. Mr. Downing passed away at the age of 93, and he was born obviously then in 1920. So he played a tremendous role in advocating that the former gas station on that property be converted and purchased to a park. And he raised the money in the day, and a park was generated, built, and celebrated. So we had originally requested $20,000 in the original budget in 2020, and that was using a component of the new levy that was established for parks and recreation projects. The budget, while modest, was based on the partnership approach that we were going to be taking, not only with the donation of product, but the donation of labor in working with volunteers to build it. Unfortunately, COVID has seriously impacted those kinds of approaches, particularly the use of volunteers. And as many may know, the price of lumber and wood has significantly increased in the last year, to the point where a $20,000 budget would not allow us to proceed with the scope of park redevelopment that we had envisioned. As you may recall, part of the 12 big moves, which were outlined in the Community Improvement Project, or the CIP, did encompass Jack Downing Park and some concept plans to revitalize that park space, to make it more of an attractor to support the downtown businesses as well as special event use. So we have looked at a number of park design concepts, and predominantly what we've looked at is the inclusion of the replacement of the pavilion, gazebo, or shade structure, as we call it. And those costs are ranging between $25,000 to $35,000. Additionally, we have incorporated within the park the memorialization to recognize the loss of those to COVID-19 that are from Shelburne, both in 2020 and 2021. And we're certainly hoping that there's not additional names to add to a plaque, but we have looked at a COVID memorial structure and a price range for that between $5,000 and $8,000. I should note that the prefabrication units for shade, pavilion, gazebo-like structures are ranging between $25,000 to $35,000 installed, which brings this budget from a $20,000 original projection to between $43,000 to $56,000. Of course, if we were able to secure donations or a donation, particularly to support the shade structure, which will be an important feature for events within the space, that would certainly offset this requested extra budget. We've also gone through, again, as an extension of what was outlined in the CIP, that this important space would serve a number of design principles in terms of how it would be refurbished. It would be important, as I've noted in the budget that we've outlined, that we would add the COVID memorial. That's an additional new feature. The shade structure pavilion, it's critically important that the design that's chosen not only have an aesthetic, and we're assuming a historic type of period look to it, but it needs to be fully accessible. And fully accessible is impacted by barriers such as railings or grading or ramps. We want to have a space that is an activator and certainly supports, as I've mentioned, gatherings, staging, as well as entertainment extensions of Grace Tippling Hall, and especially night events, so that not that you would move from one to the other automatically, but the two could be integrated formally. And that also supports downtown businesses. Additionally, we're looking at to support the number of ceremonial flag raising in recognition of so many cultural events, whether weekly or monthly, the flagpole, and having that a formal location for these kinds of recognitions. And a gathering place that obviously simply provides more place for the community and the public to sit than it does now with simply just the benches that are available. The other thing that we did look at, which is the second component of this, was the direction that was dated back to September 9th, 2019. So as you can see in the appendices, some information on the letters which spell out Toronto in Nathan Phillips Square was recently replaced. They were originally installed during Pan Am, but the replacement, and certainly they're well lit, they're very tall, but Toronto has less letters than Shelburne. It was $760,000 to replace those letters, and there would be ongoing maintenance costs associated with that. With the very small space of Jack Denning Park, under 6,000 square feet, the letters would not adequately fit in this park location. This report is recommending that we review that direction and consider what other parks potentially could support those letters and the additional costs through the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and incorporate any of those recommendations through the Recreation and Parks Master Plan within the 2022 draft budget for council's consideration. The appendix had also included one other local community, the town of Collingwood, that has a similar type of smaller sign, and they abbreviated their town name from Collingwood to Seawood. And there's two examples, one where it's placed in front of Town Hall, lit and unlit, and another where it's in another park or open space event location. I believe it was on Huron or Pine Street. So the funding that would be required to, I guess, support the budget is available. It would be applied to the same initial fund that was used, and that is the 2% surcharge special levy. The summary of what is already allocated for that fund is that the splash pad and the tennis court / pickleball court would be applied to that. There's a total in the fund between 2020 and 2021 of about $308,000, with $226,000 committed, leaving a balance of $82,000 currently. Therefore, there's enough money within that particular fund to support the balance that's recommended to increase the budget from Jack Downing Park from $20,000 to up to $56,000. And as I already mentioned, of course, any donations that we were able to secure would offset the budget for this project. Mayor Mills, that's the completion of the outline of the report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. When I first requested that the initial $20,000 be included in the 2020 budget, certainly my thought and my vision at the time was that would be some seed money to get us started, and my expectation at that time, what still remains the case now, is that the additional money that we would require to actually fund the construction of the upgrades would be done so through the help and support of our community, particularly hopefully our development community. It's interesting to look back at some of the background on this park, and if Mr. Downing in the years preceding 2000 was able to raise over $86,000, and I'm sure in 2021 we can raise the 56 or whatever it is that's going to be needed to do this. Personally, I would rather not draw on that Parks and Recreation Reserve for this, and I would prefer to leave that money for more active types of Parks and Recreation uses, particularly knowing that we're going into a Parks and Rec master plan this year. So I'm quite comfortable in reaching out to a number of our local development partners to see if we can raise some of this money. In terms of timelines, Denise, how quickly would we need those funds in hand to be able to have this done this year?
Through yourself, fairly quickly. So in order for us to meet what we're projecting as a mid-September timeline, in order to have a ribbon cutting and make the space usable with part of 2021 remaining. I mean, you could approve that we access this fund and replenish it when sponsorships or donations are supported. Alternatively, we could wait until we had the funding raised through a fundraising or donation approach and delay the timelines on the projected opening to correspond with that, which may mean spring 2022. It's again about winter construction and installation, that you don't want to get into frozen or winter conditions when we're trying to undertake this. I mean, we certainly can go ahead with a $20,000 budget as approved and get as much as we can get done, which won't be a lot, unfortunately.
No, and that's fair enough. I've made some initial inquiries and actually have a fairly positive response so far. If we deferred the funding question until the May 31st meeting, sure. Is that going to pose any significant construction delays?
No, you could even defer the funding decision until June 14th, and then we can ensure that we go out and plan and secure at least the structures that we need to look at and have that concept plan developed, as well as get ready to consult with the BIA, at least in terms of information sharing.
Okay. Councillor Bernardo?
If we are sure on the funding, I'm not really sure why we have to wait and we can't draw and just replenish. But my other point was on the signage. I know you raised the City of Toronto, and that sign is huge. And I wasn't thinking when I proposed the sign Shelburne in the front that we would have 7-foot tall letters sitting there, because that would obscure the park almost completely from what we want it to look like. I'm wondering about something that's a little bit smaller than that. talking to the companies, it does like maybe 3-foot height rather than 7-foot height. And because all other parks are not like the downtown park. And the reason I suggested, we looked at Jack Downey when we made that suggestion for the thing, it's the focal point of the town. It's where we wanted, like you said, drive people to stop, look at it, stop, and go into the local downtown businesses. And that was the attempt. If you put it in Greenwood, or if you put it in Fiddle Park or any other park in town, it becomes almost invisible and doesn't drive anything towards the downtown core and the BIA. So to me, the letters, whether it's abbreviated, and I don't know how you could abbreviate it, like Collingwood, I guess you can put SH, or SE or SL, I guess SHEL, shell or something, I'm not sure. But the point of it, for the lettering to be there, was to make it a focal point of the town. And if there's any way we can get a report on the costing of what a little bit smaller lettering would look like, if that's possible. Doesn't have to be 7-foot tall lettering. It's just something that lights up and lets people stop and look at it. Because if you go to Ottawa, and like you showed us in Collingwood, that's where people gather around, is that type of signage. They go into the downtown, and that's why the Ottawa sign's in the byway market, because they drive people there. So that's the reason for the proposal for the signage. The rest of it I don't have an issue with, but I just want to make a focal point for people to stop. And I don't see that in any other park other than the Jack Downey Park. That was the intent of the Jack Downey Park and the signage.
So we can certainly provide you with concept plans with the placement of letters of various sizes, spelling out Shelburne or some form of Shelburne, and how that integrates or looks within the park concept. Again, as I mentioned, the park is about 5,500 square feet. It's exceptionally small. And our understanding was that a pavilion or shade structure was going to be a significant enhancement and much larger, so it will actually take up much space. So certainly we can do that, and you can then visualize what a lit sign, even at 3 foot, spelling out Shelburne would look like in terms of the space configuration. And that can also be shown with or without that. Again, I thought recommending that it be contemplated within the Parks and Recreation Master Plan may be strategic, as the end use of Fiddle Park in terms of a focal destination with visitors and community alike has not yet been evaluated. And again, I can only speak to my own experience having traveled, is that in many places, the letters are part of a park, a major park that's large, where you take your photograph almost as an Instagram memory and you share it. It's the same letters that they have in Huatuco, Mexico, in Australia, in some of the cities. Toronto, yes, of course, but they're usually quite large, lit, and I've never seen any that are smaller than my height, but certainly to your point, Councillor Bonato, will provide you with all the information for council to make a decision on the inclusion of letters potentially at that park.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have Deputy Mayor Anderson, Councillor Buffett, and Councillor Hall.
Who wants to go first?
I'll just be honest.
What?
You want to?
Yeah, I'll comments.
Ready, go ahead, Councillor Buffett.
Go ahead.
Just to go along with some comments that were made by Denise about the letters and the size of the letters. Just the rest of council may or may not be aware of what the Heritage Committee is doing right now. On that wall that is going to be facing that park, we are going to have a big, huge historical mural on that wall. So between that and the large pavilion and everything else that will be redesigned in that park, I think having large letters, no matter what size, is going to take away from that, because that will on its own be a very prominent location for anybody going by, whether there's the letters Shelburne or anything else for that matter. So I think in terms of the creative or artistic or visual impression that we're going to create with what we're planning to do there, I think that's something that we need to focus on and not maybe look at these letters for Shelburne being in say Fiddle Park or another park. That's just my personal opinion.
Excuse me, can you tell me what wall that is?
Yeah, the wall where the water,
The old, I know which one it is.
yes, you know where I'm right next to the park.
We're cutting the tree down.
I don't know if we're cutting it down. We might be trimming the branches. Don't know yet.
Deputy Mayor Anderson.
We might be trimming the branches. Okay, that might be the solution. I agree. Sorry, guys. That's what happens when you stay at home for so long. Anything amuses you nowadays. I agree with Councilor Bernardo in the sense that it should be somewhere in the main gateway. I mean, it was myself and Mayor Mills and Councilor Bernardo when we were in Ottawa, saw the sign there and the attraction that was there. It was in the main area, not in some sort of obscure area of Ottawa, in the city of Ottawa. And that's what really drew the attention. And that's where the idea really started after we went to that trip. So if it's not there because the footprint is not large enough, if we have to reduce the pavilion to make it work, I think it's fine. I don't think under any circumstances we were thinking about what Toronto has because that is very expensive. We were thinking more like Ottawa. I think the Shelburne can be shortened, whether it's S Burn, like C Wood. That probably only eliminates maybe a couple of letters, maybe one or so, whatever the amount is, but there's options there. So I'm glad to hear our CEO speak to the fact that she will provide options, because I do believe that it should be in the gateway of the town. So that's number one. Number two, I agree with also Council Bernardo that I think the money should come from whatever reserve that we have. Fundraising is not something, I mean, just look at the Shelburne splash pad. If we could just rely on our developers and everybody else to get the money, that project would have been done a long time ago. Now, I know it's not 300,000, it's a few, $15 or $16 or $20,000 that we're talking about here, but that's not money that falls off of trees, whether you're a developer or anybody else. And so unless there's somebody who's willing at this point to come forward and say, maybe it's KTH, but we'll see who's prepared to come forward. But if somebody's prepared to come forward and say the money is there, then I say go for it. But if not, then I'd like to see the money drawn from the reserve. And my last point is this. The COVID-19 memorial on its face sounds like a fantastic idea. My concern though is this, and Mayor Mills, you will remember this, and I'm not saying they're apples to apples, so I want to be clear with this, is at the county, there was an issue about, there was a very well-known staff member that had passed away, and the question was, do we lower the flag for that individual to honor that person's memory? And the idea was, sort of the thought around the table is, geez, if you do that for this person, do you create a slippery slope where now other people are saying, well, what about me in this situation? And so even though the memorial is for its intended purpose, and like I said, on its face, it sounds like a great idea, do we put ourselves in a position where other people come and say, well, you recognize people for COVID-19 and their passing, what about in a situation like this, whatever that this may be? And do we put ourselves in a conundrum-like situation by doing that? I'm not saying there's a wrong or right. Well, I guess there is a wrong or right, but that's just my thought on that. And I'd certainly welcome the thoughts of the committee members here as to whether they see that or they don't see that.
Okay, thanks. But before we jump over to Councillor Hall, just to that point, Deputy Mayor, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. And my initial reaction is, the COVID-19 pandemic has been such a, wide-ranging and impactful event in our lives that's, taken up more than a year now. So in my mind, I certainly would have no problem distinguishing this from other, sorts of things if that became a question. I always struggle a little bit with concerns raised over precedent. I've said this different times in different contexts. I think we're all we're all adults. We can all look at each issue, based on its own merits. And I tend not to give a whole lot of stock to the slippery slope argument, but particularly less so when it's such a watershed event like a COVID-19 global pandemic. My preference, I think, would be not to necessarily name individuals, but just have sort of a broad memorial to those who were affected by the pandemic within the community, and leave it at that. Councillor Hall.
So again, maybe a little bit different than Deputy Mayor and Councillor Bonato, but when I look at this, it's 2.5 times the original budget. And I think we really need to look at what that cost impact is, take a further step back. If you're looking at that 36,000 coming out of that reserve, what do we do if the tennis courts goes over? Or, when the pickleball gets added to that, what happens when we then have to look at the cricket situation, or even the splash pad as mentioned? There's only $82,000 in that reserve. And if we're going to take it all up in just this one park, what happens on those other overruns? And again, I know it's very difficult to project these overruns, but again, it's something that we see time and time again, and not having a reserve to cover some of those other larger items. Again, this is a $226,000 budget this year. We're only talking about 20,000 of that overall budget, and it's already over 36,000. So I really think that we need to be a little bit more diligent as we look at this.
Just to be clear too, and I mean, I'll take the responsibility for that, because I think back in September of 2019, I think I was actually the one that suggested the 20,000 for that initial seed money. And just to restate what I said earlier, my full intention at that time, what was that seed money would then be supported by additional contributions from the community. I never anticipated the 20,000 was going to be, enough to build what we're looking to build. It simply was, hopefully that's enough money to get some engineering and some plans in place. And then once a budget has been established, we can then reach out to our community. Based on the discussion, I mean, I'm prepared to sort of modify the motion as it's recorded in the agenda, hopefully in a way that allows staff to carry forward, but also reflects my confidence in our ability to get that funding from the community. So unless, Councillor Fegan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm of the same thought as Councillor Hall. We've really got to watch. These are unprecedented times. We are in very tight financial situations. I mean, we've got significant out costs coming up with waste treatment plant and everything else. I'm wondering, is there a possibility of us doing this in stages? For example, the COVID-19 granite memorial feature, I think, is a phenomenal idea, something that I certainly would absolutely get behind. I'm wondering if maybe we do this, we focus on the memorial feature this year. Maybe we take a look and seeing at what are the overall costs going to be for the gazebo next year or the following year, and sort of put plans together so that we do this, but we don't necessarily have to do it in one shot.
Certainly, we can phase up any project based on a capital schedule and compartmentalize what elements of the project are done in 2021 based on a $20,000 budget, and then add to the project in 2022. It would be staff's understanding that council's consideration of the surcharge may be considered to be continued in 2022 again. Additionally, with respect to the concerns about overruns, we do also have the ability, when development charges are confirmed, to utilize those applicable fees to support growth, which the splash pad would be. And the budget that we originally provided to council for the tennis courts and pickleball courts was for 2 and not for 1. So we're quite confident that the budget that we've provided to you will fully support those costs. I had just mentioned during the budget presentations that it did not include lighting, but we're not concerned about the $200,000 for tennis court, combo pickleball court at KTH Park being any concern. So But certainly
Councillor
whatever
Fegan.
you would like us to undertake, we can certainly do that.
Councillor Fegan, I would fully support a phasing. You know, if I didn't think we could raise the 56,000 that's needed. But as I said, you know, based on some of the initial conversations I've had, I really am quite confident that probably as early as the May 31st meeting, I can come back and confirm that we have, you know, committed, confirmed support to do that. So, you know, that's why I'm going to present the motion that I plan to present. But Councilor Bernardo.
I'm going to support the motion that you're going to present, and I don't mind seconding it. And in addition to the discussion you're going to have with fundraising, I think a little extra fundraising maybe can be put in there just in case we can't put some form of lettering in Jack Downey Park. And, you know, something that will not overrun the mural and make it not a feature, but something that will still attract and look reasonably nice within the park.
Okay. All right. So with that, I'll read out sort of what I've scribbled down here. So be it resolved, the council receives report CAO 2021-04 regarding Jack Downing Park project cost estimated 2021 increases for information, and that the park project cost be increased from 20,000 as approved in the 2021 budget to up to 56,000, and that the additional project costs be funded from the Parks and Recreation levy reserve with the expectation that such funding can be replenished through community contributions, and further that the review of additional signage and lettering be reviewed by staff, and that sample renderings be provided for council's review to assess possible locations for placement. Did you get that, Jennifer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Councilor Bernardo, are you still okay to second that?
Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Wagner?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. This doesn't affect anything that we've already sort of set aside, you know, allocation for, correct? Like we had set aside that 20,000 for a possible dog park. I know we've talked about, you know, the tennis courts and whatnot, but nobody mentioned the dog park. So I just want to make sure that, you know, we still have that in the back of our mind. You know, just as recently as I think it was last week, there was another, you know, community thread on social media about, you know, wanting this dog park for our town. So I just want to make sure that, you know, we don't pull from the reserve too much to pull away from, you know, potential other projects as well.
Carrie?
Thank you, and through the mayor. When we did our 2021 budget last fall, we hadn't completed the soft service review for the development charges at that point. So the budget depicts that we are predominantly taking money from that Parks and Recreation Special Reserve, because that's all we thought we had at that point in time. But when we did the DC review for the soft services, you will recall that we combined the Parks and Recreation Development Charge Reserve with the indoor recreation line, which thereby opened up more money for us. And we actually do have enough in our DCs to pay for the our portion of the splash pad. It's been discounted with the 300,000 for that will be raised by the Rotary Club. And we also have the funds available for the tennis courts as well as the dog park. So even though we've budgeted in this 2021 budget to take from those reserves, we most likely will not have to utilize all of the amount that we had originally budgeted. So that's why staff was confident that if we did use it for the Jack Downing Park, we would still be okay.
Okay. Any Deputy Mayor Anderson?
I was going to say, with that good news, we should get the sign with gold trimmings.
All right, any further discussion on the motion? All in favor? That's carried. Okay. Why don't we take a quick 5-minute break and come back and finish it off.